Induction wave tuning, what is it and how much horsepower is it actually worth? That's what we're going to break down today on this episode. All right, guys, today's video is on the complete 4-wave cycle of induction tuning. And I'd just like to thank everyone for the last video. Tons of comments, some really great comments, some really valid points, and some idiocy in there as well. If you're the type of person that comes to the channel and just writes DFI sucks, this is probably not the channel for you. So maybe find someone else to follow. But then some really good comments on different pressures that DFI works. A couple of misnomers about people saying it's not the DSM ratio, it's actually the chamber. That's completely false. We've back-to-back this, shops we've helped to back-to-back this, and many good engine builders around the world have back-to-back this. It's been tested to death, and the whole point of the video wasn't to favor DFI, because I had people, again, DFI sucks, or, carbons this. I'm well aware of all the problems DFI has. This is why OEM sometimes run twin injectors, which a few people made points of. That helps wash the back of the valve and stops that carbonation process. But then again, we have Ferraris that have far better injector time cycles, Mazda also, and they don't seem to suffer from the carbonation problems that other DFI units do. So there's a lot of factors that come into it, but the biggest point I broke the video down for was to understand why and what were the mechanisms behind why DFI actually makes more horsepower than port injection. And its number one contributor obviously is its DSM size. And again, interesting point, which I was going to bring up but didn't run out of time. A good race carby is actually around about 30 to 15 micrometers. So interesting fact. All right, and the last point I'll make on all the comments and stuff like that, I had one person saying that there was over 30 years of papers on quench and we don't need it. Guys, if you've got that sort of stuff, please send it through. I've done a hell of a lot of testing in this area, and I was actually just talking to an engine builder after I posted this about what a couple of engine builders had found. I've also heard Darren Morgan talk about this when we're talking about how close to get to the cylinder head. Quench is definitely needed, so let's rule that out of the way. If we look at all the top super stock, pro stock, top NA in the world, they're all using quench for a reason, because it does accelerate that burn speed and it also improves thermal efficiency. But the bigger point Alex made, and even Darren Morgan's made, and a couple other engine builders, is we don't actually want to get too close depending on how much quench area we've got, because it actually creates a pumping loss. And then we also talked about how rod ratio affects this. So in pro stock and drag racing, we have much shorter rod ratios compared to, say, Formula One. So the distance of that snapping back and the vacuum, the negative pressure trying to pull these two parts apart is what creates that pumping loss. So again, I found the sweet spot at around 26, 24,000. Again, every engine's different, as I explained in the last video, but the right amount of quench is key. Not no quench, not all quench, the right amount. So let's now get into our induction tuning. All right, so we're going to cover the 4 major wave dynamic mechanisms that we can use to help tune the induction system. And the first one is intake valve opening. So when the intake valve opens, we create a negative wave that shoots up to the plenum and will flip polarity when it hits the plenum, but I'll cover that as we go. The next wave is obviously exhaust-induced scavenging. If we design our exhaust properly, especially if we incorporate steps, we'll create a negative wave. And this is ignoring the physics, so the actual mechanical mechanisms of induction tuning, so inertia supercharging and pressure drop. So when air rushes out of the exhaust port, it obviously creates a negative pressure in other cylinders, and also all that weight of air rushing out creates a negative pressure at the back of the valve. But then we have the actual induction wave that's going to refract back into the cylinder if we get the timing right and if we get the stepped header right, because the change or any change in diameter in the induction system will cause a reflection wave. Most will cause two waves, one that will throw off positive and one that will throw off negative, depending on where in the induction it is. So there's quite a bit to it. The next one, and the most important one, that pretty much all your induction tuning as far as runner length is done or based on, is our intake closing event. So when that valve slams shut, we get a ton of pressure that's going to hit the back of the valve, and this is going to cause a positive pressure wave to head to the plenum, which hits the plenum, throws a positive wave into the plenum, but then throws a negative wave back at the valve. And this is the valve that, this is the wave that many people talk about when we tune to the third harmonic, because we're tuning to the third cycle of that positive pressure wave. And the most common equation, I have my own. All the calculators on Einstein motors are designed by us at Bain Racing. We have a very similar one to this, and we also have an after TDC or BDC factor as well, and a temperature coefficient. But this is an industry sort of standard for temperature. I'm pretty sure it uses around about 1300 feet per second, which is a little quick for me. I like to use around about a 1200 factor for drag racing and tunnel rams, especially sheet metal manifolds, because they don't see the convection that a cast manifold will have. This is why temperature is a key factor to all of the induction tuning. And our last effect is our Helmholtz resonator. This is when the valve is open. We have really two Helmholtz resonators, one in the plenum and one in the cylinder as well. And the cylinder is actually changing volume, but we'll have waves go right out to the throttle body and come back in while that valve is open. So we're going to cover some of that now. So let's get into it. All right, so now we've got a basic understanding of how all these waves help an engine. Let's fine tune it a little bit more and understand what's happening in a perfectly tuned engine as far as harmonic lengths go. The first factor we have to look at is scavenging. I've done this one at mid-bore for now, but to explain the scavenging wave, that negative pressure that actually runs up the intake over overlap. So not only do we have a negative wave created when the valve actually opens, we have another negative pressure drop that the exhaust has created, so a low pressure event in here, that creates another wave. These two negative waves will shoot up the plenum, up the runner to the plenum. As soon as they hit this opening, they flip polarity. Now they come back as a positive wave, and these will hit it around mid-bore to help increase that density, help increase that cylinder filling. And on top of that negative wave, when that valve opens, we have the other third harmonic pressure wave landing as that valve's opening. So we have a positive pressure wave, which we'll break down a little bit later. I'll show you the math on that. So as the valve opens, it creates a negative sine wave that goes up, but we also have a positive wave arriving at the same time the valve's open. We generally want that wave to arrive at about 50 thousandths of lift. So we don't want it to arrive just as the valve's opening, because the flow potential is very low. We want it to arrive at that 40, 50, 60 thou area. And that's what the equation that I showed you in the last one, where we talk about effective valve timing. I'll break it down a little bit more. So they're the major mechanisms that are actually happening in the background. And if we get everything right, then this is how we're able to boost the volumetric efficiency of an engine way, way past 100%. Also noticed some in the comments saying that 100% is impossible. I'm not really sure where you're getting that. The top pro stock guys are getting plus 130%. So just think about that for a second. If they've got a 500cc pot, they're getting an extra 30% more volume compressed into that density, into that chamber. So they are 100% real. We have achieved 100% plus VEs for a very, very long time. Pretty much ever since we went away from side valves, because side valves didn't have overlap and they didn't really harness any of these mechanisms that we're talking about. It wasn't until overhead valve come into it, and then obviously ram effect started getting pushed very much by Chrysler Mopar, and that sort of led us into the, you know, the evolution of ram induction, tunnel rams, and so on. So all right, so let's talk about the holy grail of intake tuning, and that is the third harmonic. Again, I wrote this equation before. Now we're going to actually break the math down a little bit to help you understand what's actually happening. So there's multiple harmonic waves, and when we talk first, second, third harmonic waves, we're talking about the positive pressure that's going to return. Because remember in the last part we were talking about the polarity change when we hit an open end. So if we've got a positive pressure wave when that valve shuts that we want to time for arrival when it opens again, that wave has to bounce up and down quite a few times. So our first harmonic, I think it's 4 times. So what we'll have is a positive wave goes up, hits the plenum, inverts polarity, comes back as a negative, hits the valve, flips, doesn't flip, sorry, bounces back off the valve as a negative, goes to the plenum, hits the plenum, flips polarity again, comes back as a positive. So that's first harmonic. Now the first harmonic is the strongest out of all the harmonics. Obviously, if we get a bouncy ball, the more times it bounces up and down again, the more times it loses energy and eventually stops. So we know the first harmonic carries the most punch, but the problem with the first harmonic is we need foot long, like I'm talking 3-4 foot long induction system to try and harness this. And there's 2 factors we have to consider in induction tuning. First is our physical factor of drag coefficient, surface finish, and volume, what we're trying to fill. So the speed of the air itself, ignoring the wave moves at the speed of sound. So by looking at both of these factors, straight away we know the first harmonic is too long to try and create velocity without restriction. So that brings us to the second harmonic. And in the second harmonic on something like this, we might be 20 inches long. Again, great for torque, but horrible for a good balance of horsepower and torque together to get that really, really good spread. So the second harmonic is out. So that brings us to the third harmonic. I think it's like 12 cycles in the third harmonic. I'll break them down in a second, but we'll just do the maths first. So it's bouncing up, down, up, down, up, down, up, and down. Then it opens and in fills that positive pressure wave to obviously help scavenging as well, because we have the negative wave from the scavenging basically dropping pressure, so creating a pressure drop. So now we have a positive pressure. Remember again in the last video how I talked about all engines are boosted. If you can just understand the pressure differentials, it'll help you understand the mechanics of engines and how they feel. Well, this is again feeding into that pressure differential. So the exhaust, due to the velocity and the wave, causes cylinder pressure to drop. And now say this is atmospheric pressure. Now that a wave is arriving, we're higher than atmospheric pressure. So this gives us a great pressure differential to clean that cylinder out. Any residual exhaust gas plus this positive pressure, high pressure, will want to fill the low pressure, and it does it really, really fast. And the better we do it, the more efficient the engine becomes, and more we improve those positive VEs over 100%. So now let's get into the math of it. So our first factor we have to understand is effective cam duration. Pretty self-explanatory. So 720, obviously we're talking about a 4-stroke engine. So a 4-stroke engine needs 720 degrees, so 2 full crank rotations to complete a single cycle. So it's 720 minus our advertised duration minus 30. We do this first, so 300 degrees minus 30 gives us 270. 270 for that gives us 450 effective cam duration. So now we've got one figure to plug into the equation. The other one is the reflective value. Again, for our RV, we're going to use the third harmonic. I try and use the third harmonic in everything. Most tunnel rams are tuned for the third harmonic. Most single planes are tuned for the fourth harmonic. So the fourth harmonic doesn't have as much energy or return force. That's why a single plane generally will never make what a tunnel ram will, or something that's tuned to a proper third harmonic. And any of the really, really good single planes you'll see out there now, they're getting a lot of induction length, a lot of plenum, and really standing them up so they look like a tunnel ram but in a single plane version. So runner diameter, for this I use the port's average CSA converted to a diameter. So if we've got a port with an average of 2.1, 2.2 CSA, convert that into a diameter, and that'll give us our rough runner diameter. And RPM. So we're going to use 7,500 here as the example. So basically fill it in. Our R value is 3. That's the diameter that we're just talking about. So on this engine, it's 1.6. So we have our effective cam duration, 450, times by a quarter, times by airspeed times 2, our RPM, and our third harmonic. We run through that, fairly simple, come down. Before we take it off, that gives us around about 0.8. 13 gives us 12.2 of runner length. And runner length, whenever we talk runner length, is from the valve to the plenum. Now, there's heaps of factors that are going to affect this calculation. I broke down the Blair study on why that wasn't quite right as far as bells go, and why simple radiuses will make you far more horsepower, especially harmonically. And again, if you time all these factors in right, you're talking 10 to 15 horsepower percent on top of what you're just even getting CSAs right. If we get all the harmonics right, your engine is worth 10 to 15% more horsepower. This is why the third harmonic and scavenging mechanisms on the exhaust are really what separates, the general guys to the race guys, because they're harnessing all these specifics. It's all the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% that they can stack on top of each other that makes that engine just work so much more efficiently. All right, let's cover a little bit of the math to help you understand what these waves are actually doing and the speed at which they travel. Again, the speed is 12 to 1300 feet per second, depending on temperature. And temperature is the factor here, not density. This is why I say with our boosted stuff, our wave tuning applies just as much. We're not changing the velocity or anything with boost, we're changing the density. Density doesn't affect sound, it's the temperature that does. So this is where, when we do analysis on intake setups, we take into account, especially whether the car is intercooled or not. Because if it's not intercooled, it needs a far shorter runner to try and optimize these harmonic timing events. Where if it's intercooled, it's different again. So what we're actually looking at is this wave when the valve shuts. So it goes from here, it slams shut, we get this wave that shoots up as a positive. Whenever a positive wave hits an opening, so what actually happens here is this wave shoots up, hits the end of it, it tends to balloon slightly, then snap back. But when it snaps back, it's snapping back as a negative. It changes polarity. While it throws a positive out into the plenum, it throws a negative back at the valve. And then the valve wave's going to come down. So what I've done here is just highlighted the first harmonic. So then we have the second, and then we have the third. So the closed event starts it. We're starting at the valve, we're starting with a positive wave. That shoots up to the plenum, hits the plenum as a positive wave at around 0.099 of a second. Our total cycle speed here, if we look, 720 degrees gives us 0.016 of a second. That's a total of 720 degrees. But what we need to work out from there is the actual cam event cycle of that, which works out at 0.0097 seconds. That's the total time the valve's closed. Now we can use the sound speed, and this is why it's very, very critical to take temperature and everything into your factors. Again, most of the analysis we use is in PipeMax, because PipeMax will take this into consideration. I have my own calculators that will get you really, really close, but if you want really, really good data, something like PipeMax is a lot better, because you really need to take into consideration radiuses and openings. And while we're using an average cross-sectional area in the calculation will get you close, but the instant you start playing with smaller heads, bigger runners, and this, that, it all changes and only adds complication to the math. But let's just break down this simple one. And one of the factors, and this is why I broke down the Blair study on the best bell and why that study wasn't right, because it focused on CFD, so it was computer modeling, not real world. And the drama with the computer modeling obviously is what processes they use to model it first, is they make a lot of assumptions. And the second problem is they're not looking at the transitional length of elliptical bell mouths over simple bells. And this is why simple bells will make more horsepower. If we put these two on a flow bench just in steady state, which an engine is not, and this is the problem with flow benches in general, or people that focus on flow numbers rather than CSAs and all the mechanisms that come together. Many times I've had intakes flow worse and make more horsepower in the real world. And that comes down to this factor here, transitional length and harmonics. I can have a perfect bell on the flow bench. It'll flow maybe 1 to 2% better than a simple radius. But the transitional length for the signal of that wave is much longer. So there's no clear definition between high speed and low speed. It's fanning out for too long. Its transitional length is too long, whereas simple radius, it's much shorter. So we get a clear snap, much like we do with a stepped header. The point is a clear change in cross-sectional area as fast as possible. And remember, the radius is only at the entry to stop a vena contracta forming, that waterfall effect, stop separation. So the radius needs to be only as big as it needs to be for the airspeed factor you have at the plenum. Any bigger is giving away horsepower and also feeding into our transitional length, taking energy out of this wave, because the wave has to move up and down many times. This is why the radius, the size of the radius, is so important to these harmonic waves. While you won't see it on a flow bench, you see it in real world. So just quickly, the valve closed, 0 time. At the valve, it starts as a positive, goes up to the plenum, where about 1/1000th of a second, it flips to a negative, because anytime we hit an opening, the polarity of the wave will flip. The positive wave goes into the plenum and we get a negative wave come back down. The negative wave arrives at the valve and continues as a negative. It just bounces back out and heads back up to the plenum as a negative, hits the plenum at about 2/100ths of a second. That negative wave now goes into the plenum and the wave flips as a positive and comes down to the valve as a positive. And it arrives at the valve. It's done roughly 5 feet of travel, and that's the first harmonic. But again, we obviously need far too much runner length to harness the first harmonic, which means they become a velocity trap. So we won't be able to make RPM. And we've pretty much seen that with the Holly high ram, which they've done as a joke. But yeah, great for torque, but yeah, didn't want to make horsepower much over, I think, 3.5, 4 grand. So the best wave is the third harmonic. That's what we all pretty much agree on in motorsport and have for 30 plus years now, maybe even longer. Even back in the 50s, sort of Chrysler found this out when they did their tube type tunnel, where they basically just used radiator hoses and adjusted the height to find out where that wave harmonic was bang on. Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but they got a really good understanding of these harmonic waves from that. Anyway, guys, we might get into the math a little bit deeper on another one, or even break down the history of a tunnel ram, because I've had some people make absolutely ridiculous claims in the comments. I'm not really sure where it comes from, but yeah, give us some good comments. Try and keep it polite. If you've got something you disagree with, send a paper or a study, because I have thousands of technical articles, white papers and engineering papers that I get from the SAE and other sources. So again, if it's something we can share and put light on to a topic in automotive and around ICE engines, that'd be great. Cheers, guys.